The morning the stillness broke was the same as every other morning on the gray mark. Ranger Hadley Cole sat on the porch of the watchtower with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a rifle she had not fired in 3 months. The rifle was a formality. The thermos was a necessity. The silence was everything else. Below her, the Kasara Barrens stretched to the horizon in every direction, 100,000 hectares of mineral scrubland, sun-bleached ravines and fossil stone ridges that caught the first light and held it like amber. The Galactic Conservation Authority had designated the Barrens a Class 7 rewilding zone 4 years ago, pulled the settlers out, dismantled the mining rigs, and posted Hadley as one of 3 human rangers assigned to monitor the reintroduction of native apex species into a landscape that had been stripped bare by 2 centuries of extraction. The other 2 rangers covered the eastern and southern quadrants from stations 40 kilometers away. Hadley had the north. She had a watchtower, a ground rover, a medkit rated for field trauma, a satellite uplink that worked when the dust storms were not eating the signal, and a pair of binoculars she had bought with her own money because the GCA issued ones fogged in the cold. She also had the Soreth. She did not have them the way a keeper has animals. She had them the way a person has weather. They were there. They moved through the landscape on their own terms. They had been reintroduced 18 months ago, a breeding pair, and 3 juveniles released from the Brevari Xenofauna Rehabilitation Center on Pelori Station, the last surviving members of a species that had been hunted to near extinction during the mining era. The Soreth were feline in the loosest sense of the word. They had the muscular grace and the silent foot hunting gait of big cats, but that was where the comparison ended. Each adult stood 1.5 meters at the shoulder. Their pelts were the color of the Barrens themselves, a shifting pattern of dusk gold, mineral gray, and deep rust that made them nearly invisible against the scrubland when they held still. Their skulls were broad and armored with a shelf of bone that curved over their brow ridge like a natural helm, and their eyes, deep amber, vertically slit, luminous in low light, tracked movement across distances that made Hadley's binoculars feel like a child's toy. They could kill a grown Brevari in under 2 seconds. The GCA files were very clear about that. Category 9 apex predator, solitary ambush hunter in the wild, capable of bursts of speed exceeding 70 kilometers per hour across open ground, with retractable foreclaws that could open armor plating. The rehabilitation notes from Pelori Station described the breeding pair as non-socialized, non-bonded, and resistant to all handler protocols. The juveniles had been raised in a controlled environment and were classified as conditionally socialized handler averse. Hadley had read those files. She had memorized them. And then she had spent 18 months sitting on this porch, drinking coffee and watching the Soreth ignore her. That was the job: watch, record, do not interact, do not approach, do not feed, do not name them. The GCA's rewilding protocol was strict. The species was being returned to the wild, not domesticated. The rangers were observers, invisible, background. Hadley had followed every rule. She had logged the breeding pair's territory expansion across 6 seasonal reports. She had tracked the juveniles' first independent hunts, the eldest taking a rock hare on the western slope, clumsy and slow, missing twice before the 3rd pounce connected. She had documented the birth of 2 new cubs, tiny, wobbly, dusk gold bundles that the female carried by the scruff from den to den, with a grip so gentle it made Hadley's chest ache. She had reported the death of 1 juvenile to a rockslide in the eastern ravine, and she had sat on the porch that evening and stared at the Barrens until the stars came out, and felt the particular kind of grief that comes from watching something rare become rarer. She had not named them, she had not touched them. She had not spoken to them except once 4 months ago, when the male had appeared on the ridge above the watchtower at dusk and stared at her for 11 minutes straight. She had been sitting exactly where she was sitting now, thermos in hand, and the weight of his gaze had been so steady and so patient that she had found herself saying, quietly, almost involuntarily, "All right." I see you too. He had flicked one ear. Then he had turned and walked back into the scrub, silent as the stone he crossed. That was the extent of their relationship. Hadley watched the Soreth. The Soreth occasionally watched her back. Neither side crossed the line. Until the surveyors came. She heard the shuttle before she saw it. The sound was wrong for the Barrens, too loud, too sharp. The whine of a civilian transport cutting through air that was used to wind and dust, and nothing else. Hadley set down her thermos and stood. The shuttle appeared over the southern ridge, banking hard to shed altitude, its belly scarred with the kind of carbon scoring that came from cutting corners on atmospheric entry. It set down 300 meters from the watchtower, in a clearing that Hadley had been watching the female Soreth use as a nursing ground for the past 6 weeks. She was already walking toward it before the ramp dropped. 3 figures came down the ramp. 2 were Kaylori, tall, ridge-browed, blue-skinned, wearing the utilitarian jumpsuits of a commercial survey outfit. The third was Brevari, shorter, four-armed, with the smooth gray skin and crestridge of a mid-tier administrator. He carried a data tablet. He carried it the way people carry authority, held out in front of him, screen facing forward, as though the information on it should be obvious to anyone with eyes. "Ranger Cole," he said. His translator was good but slightly off on the vowels. "You landed in a denning ground." The Brevari blinked. He looked down at the flattened scrub under the shuttle's landing struts, then back at her. "I don't see any dens." "That's rather the point of a den." One of the Kaylori snorted. The Brevari, his name was Administrator Torek. She would learn shortly, adjusted his grip on the tablet and tried again. "Ranger Cole, I am Administrator Torek of the Kessara Development Authority. We have been authorized by the GCA Oversight Board to conduct a preliminary geological survey of the Northern Barrens. The survey area includes your station and the surrounding terrain within a 40-kilometer radius." He turned the tablet toward her. On its screen, a map of the Barrens glowed with colored overlay zones. Red lines cut through the heart of the Soreth's territory like surgical incisions. "We'll need to deploy seismic probes, subsurface scanners, and a temporary drilling platform. Our timeline is 72 hours. Hadley looked at the map. She looked at the red lines. She looked at the denning ground under the shuttle's struts and felt something settle in her stomach that was not anger, not yet, but the quiet, cold precursor to it. The thing that comes before the storm, when you can smell the ozone but the sky is still clear. You understand there are Category 9 apex predators denning within 300 meters of where you are standing. We've been briefed." Torek's voice had the practiced patience of someone who had dealt with objections before and considered them, resolved in advance. "The GCA Oversight Board has approved the survey under a coexistence exemption. The predators are free-ranging. They'll move when the equipment activates. It's in their nature. It's in their nature to kill things that threaten their cubs." Torek's crestridge flattened the Brevari equivalent of a tight smile. "We have deterrent systems on the equipment, sonic emitters, perimeter fencing, motion-activated strobes, standard predator aversion package." He glanced at the Kaylori behind him. "We've done this on 6 other rewilding zones without incident." Hadley studied him. She had spent 4 years on the Barrens learning to read terrain and weather and the body language of a species that could vanish into dust. She could read Torek in about 3 seconds. He was not cruel. He was not reckless. He was simply operating inside a system that had told him the paperwork was done, and the boxes were checked, and the creatures on the ground were a managed variable. He had never sat on a porch and watched a Soreth mother carry her cubs from den to den, with a grip so gentle it made the air hurt. "I need to report this to my station supervisor." "Of course, we'll begin equipment deployment this afternoon." They set up the first seismic probe 800 meters from the watchtower, in the shallow ravine where the female Soreth had established her primary den 3 weeks ago. Hadley watched from the ridge with her binoculars as the two Kalori technicians drove anchor bolts into the mineral substrate with a pneumatic hammer that sent shockwaves through the ground hard enough to rattle the loose stones on the ridge face beneath her boots. She filed her report. Her station supervisor, a Brevari liaison named Quartermaster Varus, acknowledged receipt and told her the coexistence exemption was legitimate. The survey had been approved at a level above her pay grade. She was instructed to monitor and report, and to avoid interference with authorized operations. Monitor and report, the same two words that had defined her job for 4 years. Watch, record, do not interact. The female Sareth moved her cubs that evening. Hadley watched through the binoculars as the mother emerged from the ravine den with the first cub in her jaws. A 3-month-old, dusk gold and rust-striped, its legs dangling and its eyes wide with the unfocused bewilderment of a creature too young to understand why its world had just gotten louder. The mother crossed 400 meters of open scrubland to a secondary den site in a fossil stone outcrop, set the cub down with a slow unclenching of her jaw that Hadley could see even at distance, and went back for the second. It took her 3 trips. Each time she passed within visual range of the seismic probe, her ears flattened and her gait shifted from the fluid, ground-eating stride of a relaxed Sareth to the low, tight crouch of a predator, evaluating a threat it has not yet decided to kill. The deterrent emitters on the probe activated twice. Both times, the female flinched at the sonic burst, bared her teeth at the sound, and kept moving. She did not attack the probe. She did not deviate from her path. She carried her cubs one by one to the secondary den, and then she sat at the entrance and stared back toward the ravine with her ears flat and her tail curled tight around her forepaws. Her bone ridge was half raised, not a full threat posture, but the held tension of something deciding whether to endure or to act. Hadley logged everything: time stamps, GPS coordinates, behavioral notes, den displacement 400 m east, stress indicators, ear position flat, tail curled defensive, gait compressed, maternal carry urgency elevated, transit time 30% faster than baseline den relocations. She wrote den displacement confirmed, probe placement is the direct cause in the observation report, and sent it to Varus and did not receive a reply. The next morning, the surveyors deployed a second probe. This one was closer, 500 meters from the watchtower, on the eastern slope of the ridge where Hadley had seen the male hunting at dawn for the past 4 months. She heard the pneumatic hammer start at 7:30 and felt the vibration in the watchtower's floor plates, a low shuddering that made her coffee ripple in the thermos cup. By noon, the male appeared. Hadley was on the porch when she saw him, not through the binoculars but with her bare eyes, which meant he was close. He was standing on the crest of the ridge above the second probe, motionless, his pelt blending so perfectly with the mineral scrub that if she had not known what she was looking at, she would have mistaken him for a boulder. His head was lowered. His ears were forward. His tail was still, not the relaxed drape of a resting Sareth, but the rigid line of a predator that is fixed on a target, and is calculating distance and angle, and the precise amount of force required to end the calculation. He was watching the Kalori technician, adjusting the probe's anchor bolts. Hadley stood. She keyed her comm unit. "Torek, you need to pull your technician off the eastern ridge, now." Static. Then why? "The male is on the ridge above him, 60 meters. He's in target lock posture, ears forward, tail rigid, head below the shoulder line. In the field notes that posture precedes a strike by less than 4 seconds. A pause. She could hear Torek processing the information the way he processed everything, through the filter of protocol and paperwork, and the comfortable belief that the world could be managed from a data tablet. Then, our deterrent emitters. Your deterrent emitters are designed for creatures that are afraid of loud noises. This animal weighs 400 kilograms and has been the apex predator of this landscape for 18 months. He has killed rock elk that outweigh your technician by a factor of 3. He is not afraid of your speakers. Another pause. She heard Torek conferring with someone in the background, the clipped syllables of a breviary administrator, realizing that his briefing materials had not covered this specific scenario. Then, we're activating the perimeter strobe. The strobe fired. A burst of high-intensity white light pulsed from the probe's housing, designed to startle and disorient. On the ridge, the male Sareth did not flinch. He did not move. His amber eyes narrowed against the light, the vertical slits contracting to thin black lines, and then his lip curled back from his teeth. Not a snarl, not yet, but the slow, deliberate exposure of canines that in Sareth body language meant one thing: I have decided you are prey. Pull him off the ridge, Torek. This time the breviary listened. The Kalori technician backed away from the probe with his hands raised, moving slowly, not turning his back. Smart. He had read the same field manuals Hadley had, and unlike his employer, he trusted them. The male watched him retreat for 30 meters, then float off the ridge crest and vanished into the scrub like smoke pouring backward into a bottle. One moment 400 kilograms of apex predator. The next, nothing but dust and stone, and the faint impression of paw prints that would fill with wind-blown grit before sunset. Hadley exhaled. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was not. That evening, she found the female's secondary den empty. The cubs were gone. The mother had moved them again, farther this time, into the deep ravine network on the far side of the fossil stone ridge, where the terrain was rougher and the sightlines were worse, and the ground was too broken for a shuttle to land. Hadley tracked the displacement on her rover's mapping system and logged the new coordinates. The female had now moved the cubs twice in 48 hours. In 18 months of observation, Hadley had recorded exactly 4 den relocations total. 2 in 2 days was not normal. It was stress. It was a mother running out of places to hide her children. She filed the report. Varys acknowledged receipt. No action was taken. The acknowledgement was a single line: noted, continue monitoring. Hadley sat on the porch that evening and watched the sunset paint the barrens in shades of copper and rust, and felt the particular kind of anger that builds in people who have been told to watch something go wrong and do nothing else. The third probe went in the next morning. This time, Hadley was there when they placed it. She stood 30 meters away with her arms crossed and watched the Kalori technicians bolt a subsurface scanner into the ground at the mouth of the ravine, where the female had first denned 3 weeks ago. The original den, now abandoned, but still inside the female's scent-marked territory. The scanner hummed when it activated, a low, persistent vibration that Hadley could feel through the soles of her boots even at 30 meters. It set her teeth on edge, and she was not a Sareth. That frequency, she said to Torek, who was standing beside the equipment shuttle reviewing data on his tablet. What is it? Torek glanced at the scanner. Subsurface resonance mapping, standard geological frequency. 14 Hertz. 14 Hertz is within the auditory sensitivity range of every feline apex species catalogued by the GCA. The Sareth's hearing extends to 8 Hertz, well below human range. You're broadcasting a sound that, to the Sareth, is indistinguishable from a territorial challenge call. It's the same frequency a rival male uses to claim hunting ground. Torek looked at her. His crest ridge was flat again, that tight, managed expression that passed for diplomacy among breviary officials. Ranger Cole, the coexistence exemption specifically accounts for. I know what the exemption accounts for. I am telling you what the animal hears. It hears something in its territory that sounds like a rival predator that will not leave, and it has 2 cubs in a den 400 meters from here. A Sareth female with cubs does not retreat from a territorial challenge. She eliminates it. The breviary exhaled through his crest vents, a gesture that Hadley had learned to read as controlled frustration. The exemption is valid. The timeline is approved. We have 36 hours remaining. The animals will adapt. The animals will not adapt. They are not adapting. They are escalating. Torek's crest flattened further. He turned back to his tablet. The conversation was over. Hadley walked back to the watchtower. She climbed the stairs. She sat on the porch and did not drink her coffee. She picked up the binoculars and watched the third probe hum in the ravine mouth, and felt the ground shiver beneath her boots and knew. The way you know weather. The way you know the shift in the air before a storm front crosses the ridge. That something was going to break. The female attacked the third probe at 200 that night. Hadley woke to the sound of tearing metal and the shriek of the probe's housing being ripped from its anchor bolts. By the time she reached the porch with her binoculars, the scanner was in pieces on the ravine floor, and the female was standing over the wreckage with her bone-ridged skull lowered and her foreclaws buried in the housing like blades in a sheath. Her eyes caught the starlight and reflected it back in twin discs of amber fire. The deterrent strobe fired once, uselessly, its light splashing across the female's pelt like water off stone. She did not flinch. She ripped the strobe housing off the probe with one forepaw and crushed it against the ground. Behind her, deeper in the ravine, Hadley could hear the cubs. They were making the sound that Sarath cubs make when their mother has told them to stay, and they are doing it. But barely. A high, thin trill that vibrated at the edge of human hearing, too high for most alien species to detect, pitched exactly at the frequency that evolution had designed to reach a human ear and make something behind the sternum tighten. The female lifted her head from the wreckage. She looked directly at the watchtower, at Hadley. 300 meters and total darkness, and the Sarath's eyes found her with the precision of a targeting system that did not need light to function. Hadley held still. She did not raise the binoculars. She did not move. She stood on the porch in her undershirt and field pants with her boots unlaced and her hair unwashed, and she met the gaze of a 400-kilogram predator across a field of starlit dust and shattered equipment. 10 seconds, 20. The female's ears rotated forward, not aggression, not the flat-eared fury she had shown to the probe. Forward, toward Hadley, reading her. Then the female's foreclaws retracted from the probe housing, with a sound like knives being sheathed. She turned, picked up a piece of the scanner housing in her jaws, carried it 20 meters from the ravine mouth and dropped it. Then she went back for another piece. She was clearing the wreckage, not in a frenzy, methodically, piece by piece, moving the debris away from the approach to the den where her cubs were trilling in the dark with the same deliberate patience she used when she moved the cubs themselves, one piece at a time, each placed with care, each placed farther from the thing that mattered. Hadley watched her work until the ravine mouth was clear. Then she went inside, sat at her comm station, and composed a message that was longer than any report she had filed in 4 years. She sent it to the GCA Conservation Ethics Board, to the Xenofauna Rehabilitation Center on Pelori Station, to the Kesara Rewilding Zone Oversight Committee, and because she had learned something about bureaucracies in her years on the Barrens, something about the distance between a filed report and a result, to every journalist contact in her personal file. The message said, in part, the coexistence exemption for the Northern Barrens Geological Survey is causing measurable behavioral distress to the only surviving breeding population of Sarath in this sector. Den displacement has occurred 3 times in 72 hours. The breeding female has attacked and destroyed survey equipment placed within her territorial range. The breeding male has displayed target-lock predatory behavior toward survey personnel at a range of 60 meters. If the survey continues, one of 2 outcomes is inevitable. The Sarath will kill a survey team member, or the survey team will be authorized to kill the Sarath. Both outcomes are preventable. I am requesting an immediate suspension of operations pending full ecological review. She sent it at 3:47. She did not expect a reply before morning. She had filed enough reports to know the speed at which institutions moved, and it was never the speed at which things on the ground went wrong. At 4:15, the male appeared at the watchtower. Hadley heard him first, not footsteps, because a Sareth made no sound when it moved, but the faint displacement of air that came with 400 kilograms of muscle passing through space. A pressure change, a density shift, the kind of thing you only noticed after 18 months of learning what the silence was supposed to sound like. She turned from the comm station and looked through the open porch doorway, and he was there, standing at the base of the watchtower stairs, 10 meters away, looking up at her. He was enormous. She had spent 18 months watching him through binoculars, logging his dimensions from the safety of distance and protocol. She had recorded his shoulder height at 147 centimeters. She had measured his stride length at 210 centimeters at a walk, 360 at a run. She had estimated his paw print diameter at 23 centimeters. She had numbers for all of it. None of the numbers prepared her for the reality of him, standing close enough that she could see the individual hairs on his muzzle catch the starlight, close enough that she could hear the slow click of his breathing. A sound no recording equipment had ever captured, because no recording equipment had ever been this close to a living Sareth and survived. His skull alone was wider than her torso. His forelimbs were columns of muscle under dust gold fur, the retractable claws sheathed, but the sheaths themselves visible, ridges of hardened keratin that ran along the outer edge of each paw like the guards of a blade. His bone-shelf brow ridge cast a shadow over his eyes even in starlight, and beneath that shadow the amber irises glowed with their own faint bioluminescence, a trait the field manuals described, but that Hadley had never seen at close range. It was not the glow of a machine. It was the glow of something alive and ancient and aware. His eyes were fixed on her face, not on her hands, not on her boots, not on the rifle leaning against the wall behind her, on her face, on her eyes, reading her the way she had spent 18 months reading him. Hadley's training said, "Do not move, do not speak. You are an observer, you are invisible, you are background." Her instinct said something else entirely. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm working on it." The male's ears rotated, both of them forward and slightly outward, a posture she had never recorded in any of her field notes. She had catalogued 14 distinct ear positions over 18 months of observation: threat, curiosity, relaxed, alert, hunting, sleeping, feeding, grooming, territorial, submissive, dominant, pain, startle, and play. This was none of them. This was something she did not have a behavioral code for, something that fell outside the taxonomy, because the taxonomy had been built by people who had never stood 10 meters from a Sareth and spoken to it in the dark. He stood there for a full minute. The barrens were silent around them, no wind, no dust movement, just the deep mineral quiet of a landscape holding its breath. Then he did something that no Sareth in the GCA's behavioral database had ever been recorded doing. He sat down at the base of the watchtower stairs, 10 meters from a human, and he stayed. Hadley did not move from the doorway. She did not go inside. She did not pick up the rifle. She stood there in the pre-dawn dark with the barrens stretching out behind the Sareth like a sea of gray dust, and she felt the silence between them fill with something that was not fear and was not trust, not yet, but was the space where trust might grow if neither side broke it. The male sat until dawn. When the first light hit the ridge behind the watchtower, he rose, shook the dust from his pelt, a ripple that ran from his bone-ridged skull to the tip of his tail, and sent a small cloud of mineral grit floating into the sunrise, and walked into the scrub without looking back. Hadley sat down on the porch step and realized her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the weight of what had just happened, from the understanding that 18 months of silence and patience and watching without taking had been, in some language she did not speak, enough. The reply from the Conservation Ethics Board arrived at 900. It said, "Review pending. Survey may continue during evaluation period. Estimated evaluation timeline, 14 to 21 days. 21 days. The survey's remaining timeline was 30 hours. Torek deployed a fourth probe that morning. He placed it on the western flank of the fossil stone ridge, closer to the watchtower, closer to the secondary den site the female had abandoned, closer to everything. Hadley confronted him at the equipment shuttle. His crest ridge was fully raised, not anger, she recognized, but the rigid posture of a breviary who had received orders from above and intended to follow them regardless of the ground truth beneath his feet. "My authority supersedes a ranger's field assessment," he said. His voice was tight. "The exemption is valid. The timeline is approved. I have a contract to fulfill and financial penalties for every day of delay. And I have a breeding female with 2 cubs who has destroyed one of your probes and is running out of terrain to retreat into. Then she'll move to a place outside the survey zone. That's what animals do, Ranger Cole. They adapt, they move, they yield to superior force." Hadley looked at him. She had spent 4 years on the Barrens learning that the ground under your feet was never as solid as it looked, and that the things you could not see were always more dangerous than the things you could. She looked at Torek and saw a man standing on ground he did not understand, holding a data tablet that told him everything except the one thing that mattered: that the creature he had classified as a managed variable had 2 cubs behind her and a 400-kilogram mate who had spent the night sitting at a human's door, and that neither of them was going to yield to anything. "If the female engages your crew, I will not be able to protect them. I am one ranger with a rifle I have not fired in 3 months. She will be through your deterrent perimeter before your technicians can reach the shuttle. The deterrent systems have already failed 3 times. She walked through the sonic emitters. She crushed the strobe housing with 1 paw. Your systems are designed for animals that run from noise. These animals do not run." Torek's crest flattened. He turned back to his tablet. The conversation was over. At 1400, the subsurface scanner on the 4th probe activated. The hum was louder this time, a deep, bone-vibrating 14 Hz frequency that Hadley could feel in the watchtower's support struts from 200 meters away. It rattled the thermos on the porch rail. It made the loose stones on the ridge face click against each other. It filled the Barrens with a sound that was below wind and above silence, and exactly, precisely, the frequency of a territorial challenge that would not stop. At 1423, the female emerged from the deep ravine. She was not carrying cubs. She was not crouching. She was walking the full, upright, ground-eating stride of a Sareth in open territory, her bone-ridged skull lowered like a battering ram, her ears flat against her skull, and her foreclaws extended. All 4 sets. The primary killing claws on the forepaws and the secondary stabilizing claws on the hind feet, which Hadley had never seen deployed outside of a kill strike on prey. Every line of the animal's body was aimed at the 4th probe like an arrow drawn and held. Hadley keyed the comm. "Torek, she's coming. Western approach 200 meters from the 4th probe. Full aggression posture. Claws out all 4 sets. This is not a bluff charge." Static, then muffled, alarmed voices. The scramble of boots on a shuttle deck. Equipment clattering. "Activate the deterrents. They will not stop her. Pull your people to the shuttle and seal the ramp. Do it now. You have less than 90 seconds." The deterrent strobes fired. The sonic emitters howled, a wall of sound designed to trigger the flight response in every cataloged predator species in the Breviary database. The female did not slow down. She walked through the light and the noise the way Hadley walked through wind, acknowledging it, leaning into it, refusing to stop. Her foreclaws left gouges in the mineral substrate with every stride, 4 parallel lines of turned earth that marked her path like claw marks on a door. 400 kilograms of muscle and bone, and the absolute, unshakable conviction of a mother who had been pushed past the point where retreat was possible. She reached the 4th probe and hit it with her skull. The bone ridge connected with the scanner housing at full stride speed, and the housing crumpled like tin. The anchor bolts tore out of the ground with a sound like gunshots. The scanner shrieked once, a dying electronic wail that cut off when the female drove both forepaws through the casing and ripped the internal components apart. The probe's wreckage scattered across 20 meters of scrubland. A section of the casing spun through the air and embedded itself in a fossil stone ridge hard enough to crack the stone. The female stood over the wreckage and screamed. Not a roar, Sareth did not roar. It was a sound that started below human hearing and climbed through the audible range like a blade being drawn across stone, rising until it hit a frequency that Hadley felt in her teeth and her fingernails and the thin bones behind her ears. It echoed off the ridges and the fossil stone outcrops and the walls of the watchtower, and it said, in every language that ever mattered, "This is mine, and you will not take it, and I will kill everything that tries." Then the male arrived. He came over the ridge crest at full speed. No stalking, no calculation, just 400 kilograms of apex predator pouring down the slope like an avalanche with amber eyes. He covered the distance in strides that ate the ground whole, each impact sending up a burst of mineral dust, and he skidded to a halt beside the female, flanking her left side, shoulder to shoulder. Together they stood over the shattered probe and turned to face the equipment shuttle, where Torek and the two Kalori technicians were pressed against the sealed ramp hatch, staring through the viewport with the particular expression of beings who have just realized that the variable they had managed on paper was, in reality, completely and irrevocably beyond their control. The Kalori technician who had been adjusting the second probe, the one the male had stalked the previous day, had his hands flat against the viewport glass. His ridged brow was creased in an expression that needed no translation. Not fear. Something past fear. The recognition that the hierarchy he had been told about, the one where technology and paperwork and deterrent systems sat above 400 kilograms of muscle and bone, was, and had always been, a fiction. Hadley was already moving. She came down the watchtower stairs at a run, crossed the scrubland at a pace that burned her lungs, and stopped 30 meters from the Sareth pair. Both of them turned their heads toward her. 800 kilograms of predator, foreclaws out, pupils dilated to full amber, the vertical slits gone, teeth bared. The air between them smelled like ozone and turned earth, and the hot copper scent of adrenaline that Sareth exuded when their fight-or-kill response was fully engaged. It was a smell that the field manuals described as the last sensory input recorded by most prey species. Every protocol said, "Retreat." Every regulation said, "You are not equipped for this." Every field manual said, 30 meters from two agitated Category 9 predators is inside the kill radius, and you will not survive an engagement. Hadley stopped walking. She stood in the dust. She was wearing her field jacket and her battered boots, and she had no weapon, because the rifle was on the porch where she had left it that morning, the same place she left it every morning, because in 4 years she had never needed it, and she had always, in some quiet part of her mind, hoped she never would. The male looked at her, the same amber eyes that had watched her from the ridge at dusk 4 months ago, the same gaze that had held hers from the base of the watchtower stairs in the dark 7 hours ago, the same steady, patient, ancient attention that had spent 18 months learning what she was. "Easy," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. The voice she used for the thermos and the coffee and the mornings when nothing moved, and the barons were just the barons and everything in them was where it was supposed to be. "Easy. I know what they did, but you need to let me handle this now." The male's ears rotated, forward, outward, that posture again, the one she had no code for, the one that fell outside the taxonomy. The female was harder. Her claws were still buried in the probe wreckage, the housing deformed around them like clay. Her bone ridge was fully raised, the interlocking plates along her brow fanned out to their maximum width, doubling the apparent size of her skull. Every line of her body said, "I have cubs behind me and something in my territory that will not stop, and I am not finished yet." Hadley took 1 step forward, 29 meters. Every survival protocol screamed. The male's lip twitched, not a snarl, but a flicker, a question. The female's head tracked the step with the mechanical precision of something that could calculate intercept angles faster than Hadley could blink. Hadley took another step, 28 meters. "I hear you," she said. "I have been hearing you. For 18 months I have sat on that porch and watched you, and I have heard every sound you have ever made, and I hear what you are telling me now." She took a third step, and a fourth, and a fifth, and she was 25 meters from the female, and she could see the individual hairs on the Sarath's muzzle, and the dust motes suspended in the air between the beast's exhalations, and she could feel the subsonic vibration of the female's threat call in her ribcage like a second heartbeat, synchronized to nothing she controlled. The female's foreclaws retracted, 1 centimeter, 2. The tips slid back into their sheaths, the keratin clicking against the hardened paw pads. Behind Hadley, she heard the shuttle ramp crack open. Torek's voice, amplified by the shuttle's external speakers. "Ranger Cole, get away from them, we're activating them." "Shut the ramp," Hadley said without turning around, "and kill your engines." "We need to." "Kill your engines or she will come through your hull. She went through a steel probe housing with her skull. Your shuttle skin is thinner. I am not guessing." Silence. A long, terrible silence in which Hadley could hear Torek processing the geometry of his situation. The two predators, the unarmed human standing between them and his crew, and the mathematical reality that his deterrent systems were scattered in pieces across the scrubland behind a creature that had shattered them without slowing down. Then the shuttle engine spun down with a dying whine. The ramp sealed with a hydraulic hiss. Hadley stood in the quiet. The subsurface scanner was dead. The deterrent emitters were shattered. The 14 Hz hum that had filled the barrens for 3 days was gone, and in its absence the silence rushed in like water filling a void, the deep, mineral, ancient silence of a landscape that had existed before mining rigs and survey probes and coexistence exemptions, and would exist long after they were all dust. The male moved first. He walked forward away from the probe wreckage, away from the female, closing the distance between himself and Hadley with the slow, deliberate gait of a creature that was not stalking, and was not retreating, but was making a choice that had been building for 18 months. He stopped 3 meters from her, close enough that she could have reached out and laid her hand on the bone shelf above his brow ridge, close enough that his breath stirred the loose strands of hair at her temple, close enough that she could smell him, not the copper adrenaline of combat mode, but something underneath it, something warmer, something that smelled like dust and sun-heated stone and the particular musk of a creature at rest. He lowered his head, not submission. Hadley knew the difference. A Sarath submitting would flatten its ears and expose the vulnerable underside of its throat and press its belly to the ground. This was something else entirely. He lowered his head until his brow ridge was level with her shoulder, and he held it there, and his amber eyes looked up at her from beneath the bone shelf with an expression that 4 years of behavioral science and 18 months of daily observation had given her no language for. Acknowledgement, not of a master, not of a handler, not of a threat or a rival or prey, of something her field manuals had never imagined, because the field manuals were written by people who studied these creatures from behind reinforced glass and data screens. The closest she ever came to the right word was one she wrote in a personal journal entry that night, after the shuttle was gone and the barrens were quiet and the stars were out, and the male was sitting on the ridge above the watchtower in the dark, his amber eyes catching starlight. "Equal." The female approached next. She came around the probe wreckage in a wide arc, circling until she was on Hadley's left flank, the same side where she carried her cubs, the side nearest her heart, and she stopped at the same distance, 3 meters, and lowered her head the same way. Her foreclaws were fully retracted now. Her bone ridge was settling, the interlocking plates folding back against her skull. Her ears were forward, not the flat aggression she had shown to the probes, but the same posture the male had shown. That new posture, the one with no code. 2 Sarath, 800 kilograms of Category 9 apex predator, flanking a human woman in a dusty field jacket with no weapon and no protocol and no plan beyond the fundamental, stubborn, bone-deep belief that these creatures deserved someone who stood between them and the machinery that would grind them down. Hadley stood between them and breathed, and the barons breathed with her, the wind across the ridges, the dust settling on the scrub, the faint trill of the cubs in the deep ravine calling for their mother. From inside the shuttle, Torek and his crew watched through the viewport. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The Brevari administrator's data tablet hung forgotten at his side, its screen still showing the survey map with the red lines that cut through a world he had not understood, and in the space of 3 minutes had begun to. His crest ridge was fully raised, but the posture had changed, not frustration, not authority, but something older and less manageable and harder to file. The Kalori technician who had been stalked on the ridge was gripping the viewport frame with both hands, his knuckles pale blue against his skin, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with something that transcended species and rank and the entire bureaucratic apparatus that had brought them to this patch of dust. All pure, unprocessed, involuntary. The kind that arrives when you witness something your training told you was impossible, and your eyes tell you is happening 20 meters from a sealed shuttle door. Hadley did not know how long she stood there. Long enough for the light to shift from the hard white of midday to the amber of early evening. Long enough for the wind to change and carry the scent of the fossil stone ridge across the clearing. Long enough for the female to turn away first, walking back toward the deep ravine with the unhurried, fluid gait of a creature that has made its point and does not need to make it again, and for the male to follow, pausing once at the ridge crest to look back. He looked at Hadley. She looked at him. 300 meters now, the distance of binoculars and field notes and protocol. But the distance was not the same. The distance would never be the same again. Then he was gone and the barons were silent, and Hadley was standing alone in a field of shattered equipment with her hands at her sides and her pulse hammering, and the absolute, immovable certainty that she was going to win this fight. Not the one with the Sarath. That fight had never existed. The fight with the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the coexistence exemptions and the geological surveys, and the people who believed that a data tablet and a deterrent package made them qualified to walk into a world. They did not understand and rearrange it according to their convenience. She walked back to the watchtower. She climbed the stairs. She sat on the porch and picked up her thermos, cold now, the coffee bitter, and drank anyway. Then she opened her comm station and composed a second message. This one was shorter. It included the GPS coordinates of every destroyed probe, the behavioral data from 72 hours of den displacement, the veterinary stress indicators she had logged from the female's gait and posture changes, a frame-by-frame breakdown of the male's target lock sequence on the Kalori technician, and a single line that she had never written in any government report in her career. This population is not a managed variable. They are the last of their kind, and they have chosen to stand their ground. So have I survey suspension is no longer a request. It is a field conditions mandate under Section 14 of the Conservation Emergency Protocol. If the survey equipment is not removed within 12 hours, I will invoke protective custody over the survey zone and deny access under my authority as the ranking GCA field officer in the Northern Barrens. She copied the journalists again. She copied the Pelori Rehabilitation Center. She copied the Conservation Ethics Board and the Oversight Committee, and on an impulse she did not question, the Brevari Council of Species Preservation, which outranked every other body on the list by 3 administrative tiers. Then she leaned back in her chair and waited. At dawn the next morning, she heard the shuttle engines warming up. She walked to the porch with her thermos, fresh coffee, the first good cup in 3 days, and watched. Torek was standing at the base of the shuttle ramp, his data tablet under one arm, looking at the barons with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not defeat, not anger, something quieter, something that looked from a distance like the first crack in a wall that had been built out of paperwork and certainty. The oversight board has suspended the survey pending full ecological review, he said. His voice was level, careful, the voice of a man choosing his words because the old ones no longer fit. My contract has been voided. The Development Authority is recalling our equipment. The Council of Species Preservation has opened a formal inquiry. Hadley nodded. She did not say, "I told you so." She had never found those words useful. They belonged to people who cared about being right. She cared about the Sarath. Torek hesitated. He looked at the ridge where the male had appeared. He looked at the ravine where the female had torn the probe apart with her skull. He looked at Hadley, standing on the porch in her field jacket with her thermos and her unbrushed hair and her binoculars around her neck, and something in his expression shifted, a tectonic movement, slow and deep. The kind of change that happens in the rock underneath the surface where nobody can see it but everybody feels it. You stood between them, he said. No weapon, no armor, no deterrent system, you just stood there. And they stopped. They didn't stop because of me. Then why? They stopped because I was not a threat. I was never a threat. In 18 months I was the one thing in this landscape that watched them and did not try to take anything from them. I did not hunt them. I did not trap them. I did not put machines in their territory that sounded like a rival trying to claim their home. She paused. They did not stop for me. They stood down because I was already part of the territory they were defending. I was already inside the line. Torek was quiet for a long time. The shuttle engines hummed behind him. His crew was aboard, the ramp up, the equipment stowed. 72 hours of geological survey, 4 destroyed probes, 3 den displacements, and 1 moment on a dusty field that had rearranged everything. He thought he understood about the hierarchy between a data tablet and the ground beneath his feet. The GCA will want to understand what happened here, he said finally. They'll send a behavioral analysis team. I know. They'll want to know how a Category 9 apex predator formed, whatever that was, with a human ranger. It's not a bond, Hadley said. And then she stopped, because the word was wrong and she knew it, and the right word was the one she had found in the dark, standing between 800 kilograms of predator with her hands at her sides. It's a recognition. He didn't come to me because I fed him or trained him or tamed him. He came because I was quiet when everything else was loud. He came because I watched without taking. He came because 18 months of sitting on a porch and doing nothing was, to him, 18 months of proof. Proof of what? She looked at the ridge. The male was there, a dusk gold shape against the mineral gray, still as the stone beneath him, watching. That I belonged here. The shuttle lifted off 10 minutes later. The sound of its engines faded over the southern ridge, and the barrens returned to silence. The deep, full, layered silence that was not absence but presence. The silence of a landscape that was alive and watching and holding its breath only because it chose to. Hadley sat on the porch. She drank her coffee. She raised her binoculars and scanned the fossil stone ridge to the east. The female was there. In the shallow ravine below the ridge, not the deep ravine, not the secondary den, but the original den, the first one. The one she had been driven from 3 days ago. She had brought the cubs back. She was lying on her side in a patch of morning sunlight, and the 2 cubs were nursing, their small bodies pressed against her flank, their rust gold fur bright against her dusk-gray pelt. Her eyes were half closed. Her bone ridge was flat, relaxed. The ears forward and slightly out. That posture again, the one Hadley had no code for. The one she was beginning to think did not need a code because some things were better left unnamed. On the ridge above the den, the male sat. He was facing the watchtower, facing Hadley. At 400 meters through the binoculars, she could see his eyes, amber, steady, patient. The same eyes that had found hers in the dark. The same eyes that had looked up at her from beneath the bone shelf at 3 meters. He was not hunting. He was not guarding, not in the way her field manuals described guarding. He was sitting in the morning light on the ridge above his family, and he was watching the human who had stood in the dust between him and the thing that wanted to break his world, and he was staying. Hadley lowered the binoculars. She could still see him without them, a shape against the skyline, patient and still and present. She raised her thermos toward the ridge. On the ridge, the male flicked one ear. The GCA behavioral team arrived 11 days later. Their report, filed 3 months after that, ran to 400 pages. The survey exemption was permanently revoked. The Kasara Development Authority's mining exploration license was suspended. The Northern Barrens were reclassified from Class 7 rewilding zone to Class 2 protected habitat, the highest designation available, reserved for sites of irreplaceable ecological significance. In the appendix of the report, buried in a section titled Anomalous Interspecies Behavioral Data, one of the analysts noted a phenomenon that had no precedent in the GCA's xenofauna behavioral records. The breeding male Sareth routinely positioned himself on the ridge above the ranger's watchtower at dawn and remained in visual contact until the ranger emerged for her morning observation period. The analyst cross-referenced 14 months of the ranger's own field logs and found that the behavior had begun 10 months into the posting, 8 months before the survey incident, and had never been reported because the ranger had classified it as incidental proximity rather than intentional contact. The analyst reclassified it. The new designation, noted in the appendix with a recommendation for further study, was sentinel-bonded territorial integration. The footnote read, "The ranger should be reclassified from observer to recognized territorial element. The Sareth breeding pair does not treat her as a handler, a threat, or prey. They treat her as part of the territory they defend." Hadley never read the report. She did not need to. Every morning she sat on the porch with her thermos and her binoculars, and the male sat on the ridge, and the female nursed her cubs in the ravine below, and the barons held them all in the same quiet, patient, ancient silence. She had not named them. The protocol still said she should not. But some mornings, when the light was right and the dust hung in the air like gold and the male's amber eyes caught hers across 400 meters of scrubland, she would raise her thermos to the ridge and say, very quietly, "Morning." And the male would flick one ear. And that was enough.